All right, thank you so much for that reminder. So let me just take that again, right? If you want to use the access key is used when you want to connect to your AWS environment using, all right, programmatic access. So which means maybe you have an application, for example, for somebody who is a developer, all right, and then is developing an application, and that application needs to interact with maybe this, for example, the S3 we want to talk about today. Maybe the application needs to store some data into a S3 bucket, all right, then you will need your access key and secret key, all right, to tie to that application so that that application is able, but without going through the console, but through the CLI, which is your command line interface, right? Through that interface, that application is able to interact with the S3. But it is advised that you don't provision your access key just anyhow. You only provision an access key when you need one. And immediately you are done with it, the best practice is that you disable it almost immediately. All right. So your access key is not something you can play around with. It's not something you can joke with. It's a sensitive, all right, data. So you must take note of that. Then for the MFA, we did, we did walk us through in the last class how you can create an MFA, all right, for your root user. Okay, we did walk us through that. So it is okay if your root user has an MFA connected to it. So that one is something that you can do because it enhances, all right, the security of your root user. Okay, so that even if somebody asks your password for the root user, they will have to lay their hands on your MFA device in order for them to be able to authenticate, all right, with your AWS environment using the root user, all right, details. Okay, all right, so let's move ahead. Let's look at what we have for us today. I want to assume, like we said in the last class, that we should have our AWS accounts created now, all right, so that we don't incur unnecessary. You should set it up, all right, so that you can practice all those things that we are also going to be doing in the course of the class. All right, because if you don't have an account on AWS, you may not be able to follow through all of these things that we are doing. So it is important that you already have your account created, you have your credit card connected, all right? And we said also that if your credit card is connected, it doesn't mean they're going to charge you, all right, for connecting it. It is only when you use a service and then you maybe go over certain limits and then you incur a cost, that's when your card is going to be charged, all right? But as long as you're not, all right, using any service, you're not incurring any cost, nobody's going to charge you unjustly. All right, so please, if you have not set it up yet, just try and do that and set your environment up. All right, so let's talk about S3. What is Amazon S3? What is Amazon S3? Now, let me start by explaining it this way. Let's do a search. I want to show us something because I like to explain things to people, all right, graphically, and then connect to real life application. All right, S3 bucket. Let's look at S3 bucket. So let's go through this documentation first of all, and then let's look at some images. All right, beautiful. Okay, now let us explain what an S3 is. We want to consider Amazon S3. But before we start creating the bucket and start using it and start putting in data and all of that, I want us to go through what an S3 bucket is really about. Now, follow me closely. Now, this is an Amazon S3 bucket. This is the icon, all right, for the Amazon S3 bucket. Now, if you look at it, you would ask yourself, why is this, all right, service, why is it named bucket? All right, why did they choose to use the name, all right, bucket, all right, for this particular service? Now, let's try to connect that to, the real life, all right, scenario. Now, all of us, every one of us, wherever you live, whether you're abroad or Nigeria, everywhere you are, all right, you use buckets, right? Whether you want to wash your clothes, whether you have a garden in your compound and then you have flowers in those gardens, all right, it's put in a kind of pot that also looks like a bucket. All right. Now, the idea behind the bucket, the S3 bucket, is now a bucket is something or an object that can contain anything, right? Because your bucket can actually contain water. Your bucket can hold sand. All right. You can plant flower inside a bucket. All right. You can even put water in a bucket and put your legs inside that water, right? The bucket will not complain because literally a bucket is something that can hold, all right, any kind of object. Okay. That is what a bucket is. So a bucket is something that can hold any kind of object. In fact, if you want to, maybe you have a feast in the family and all that, you can actually put food inside a bucket and then everybody can dig their hands into it and eat it. So the idea is, right, a bucket is something that can hold any kind of object, right? And that is the idea behind Amazon, all right, giving it that name, S3 bucket. So the concept is, if you create an S3 bucket, the idea is this, is that any kind of data, all right, can be stored in that bucket. That's the idea. Any kind of object can be stored in that bucket. All right. Now, if you look closely, for example, let's connect this again to, all right, real life situations. Now, when you have a cup in your house, of course, I'm sure all of us will have a cup. Now, there are a few things you can use the cup to do, right? You cannot put food inside a cup. Somebody will look at you and wonder, is this person all right? Okay. So you can't put food inside of a cup, right? Even a tray, you can put food inside of a tray. You're right. You can use your tray to present certain things, but then your tray cannot hold water, for example, because if you put water inside of a tray, if you don't carry it properly, all right, the water is going to slip away. Okay. So there are different kinds of storage that are available in the cloud environment, but each of them, they have their own purpose. All right. For example, by the time we get to the EC2 section, we're going to be talking about EBS, elastic block storage. That's also a form of storage. But like I said, your cup at best is good for taking water, or maybe tea, or if you have a soft drink that you want to take, or fruit juice or something, you can put it inside of a cup and drink it. That's okay, right? Your tray, you can use your tray. You can put a cake on a tray and serve it to people. That's fine. But if you put water on a tray, right, the water is going to spill. So if you don't carry it properly and then you don't have the right balance, right, that water is going to slip off that tray. Okay, so there are different kinds of storage in the cloud space, in the cloud environment, all right? But then each of them, they have their own purposes. So like I said, when we get to the EC2 section, we're going to be talking about EBS, elastic block store, right? Your EBS at best can only be used, all right, to connect to your EC2 instance to store your operating system, right? For example, the system that I'm using now, the phone that you're using to connect, the laptop you're using to connect, the tablet you're using to connect has a kind of storage on it, all right? My system has an HDD drive that I'm using. There are other systems that are available too that are using SDD, all right? They do the same thing. The only difference is SDD is faster, all right, and more reliable than HDD, okay? But SSD or HDD, they cannot do what your S3 can do, all right? Because your S3 is designed with the concept of a bucket in mind, which means it should be able to hold any type of data, all right? So it's not limited, all right? Unlike your EBS that you can use as a boot volume and store some, operating system files on it, and that's what you can do with it. Your S3 can hold any data, binary data, non-binary data, text, video, audio, log files, name it. As far as it's a data, your S3 can hold that data. And I said in closing in the last class that the recently concluded elections and all the elections that INEC has been doing, all right, in recent times, if you've paid attention, if you are somebody, maybe you've interacted with the IREF portal of INEC, you would discover that S3 is actually the back end where all the results were saved, right? Because your S3 can hold anything and it is reliable, it is cheap, it can integrate into any kind of service. And that's why the S3 is also a very popular service on AWS, all right? Because it can integrate into any kind of service, right? You can integrate your S3 with any kind of, you can integrate with a website, You can integrate it with any application. As far as there is data to be pushed into a kind of storage, your S3 is just available, is there to do all of that stuff for you. All right. Now, I hope with that example, we've now come to understand what Amazon S3 is about. So it's a bucket, and the concept is that a bucket can hold any kind of data, right? So your S3 is not limited in the sense that you can put any amount or any type of data into your S3 bucket. All right. So in other words, we can say that your S3 is not content specific. All right. It allows any kind of content. Okay. So let's go ahead. This is just the documentation on all right, on Amazon. If you look at it also, it tells you, all right, these are the different data, analytics data, log files, application data, video, pictures, backup, any kind of data can go into your S3, right? Any kind of data. And your S3 can integrate into different things. You're right. You can have artificial intelligence connect to your S3 buckets, which means for those people who are doing data science, who are doing machine learning, all right, they can put your data in S3 and then use whatever AI tool they have to mine those data from S3 and a whole lot of other stuff. Right now, let's not bore us with different things. Let's just go right into the console. Let's create our S3 bucket and then let's, all right, explore the different features of Amazon S3. All right. So here, if I click on create bucket, all right, that will take me to this page where I can create my bucket. Now, one more thing, let me mention this. Now, if I go back from here, for example, if I go to AWS, if I click on AWS right here, now let's observe something. Now you will discover that right here, it showed me, all right, the region that I'm in currently. So this is the region that I'm using, London. That's the region that I'm using at the moment, right? Now, you will observe that the moment I click on S3, watch this space, watch what happens in that space. All right, that region changes to global. Okay, it changes to global. It's no longer the London region. So somebody may want to ask the question, why move from London, all right, to being global? Now it is simple. Your S3 bucket is actually unique across, all right, different regions of AWS. All right, now let me quickly explain this concept for us again before we go further, because some people may not understand what region is and why do we have the London region, or why do we have this region and that region. Okay, so let's go back to that and let's explain, all right, what region is. Now, if you click here, now you see a whole lot of regions here. So there's the US East, there's the different regions. All right, what does this? All right, there's the Africa region here also. They have a region presently in South Africa, right? So that's the only place they have in Africa at the moment. All right. Now, what does all of these things mean? Let's explain these things. Let's break it down so that people can understand what all of this means. Now, in the traditional setting, all right, when organizations were, all right, managing their servers, when they were, all right, when you have to have different systems within an organization, all right, within the environment, if you have an organization that has different branches, let's say there's one branch in maybe the southwest part of Nigeria, there's another branch in the southeast part, there's another branch in the northern part of Nigeria. All right. Now, each of those regions will have their own operating room, right, where they have their systems, all right, where they deploy the application that they're using within the organization. And somehow there can be some kind of internet connection such that the southwest branch and all those branches can connect together, right? Now, it is that same concept that also applies to the cloud environment. Now, remember, in the last class, I said, what cloud computing has done for us is that it has taken away the capital expenditure, all right? And what you have now is operational expenses. Operational expense in the sense that you only pay for what you use and you provision what you need at every particular point in time. So in the cloud environment, there is no over provisioning of things. Okay, you only provision the right size of what you need. So if you need 2 gig of RAM for your system, you get 2 gig. If you need 4 gig, you get 4 gig. All right, there's no over provision. All right, and then whatever it is that you provision is what you're going to pay for by the hour. All right. And that is the privilege that we don't have with the on-prem deployment. Now, the example that I gave, you have this company, they have, they have offices in different parts of Nigeria, Southwest, Southeast, South, North Central, Northwest, Northeast, and all of those places. Now, the question is, they are going to have to manage whatever infrastructure they have in those regions, right? And that's going to cost them a whole lot of money, because in all of those regions, they have to run power. The operating room has to have a very standard AC for cooling and all of that. Now, what cloud computing has done and what all of these cloud providers have done is to say, you don't have to worry about those expenses. We have the money, we have the support, we're going to deploy the infrastructure, all right, for you. Okay, so in each region within a particular state, you now have data centers that is controlled by AWS. All right, so if you look at this example, in the US East, there's a data center there, which is the North Virginia. All right, that region basically means they have a data center in that region. So US East has a data center. So that data center basically means they have thousands of servers that are connected that you and I are interacting with right now. All right. So the London region that I am in, all right, they have data center in the London region, and whatever service that I deploy in that region, it goes into one of those servers that they have in that London region. All right. Now, there's another phrase in the cloud computing. All right. You hear things like regions and availability zone. All right. We have just explained what a region is. So a region is just that, all right, the Northwest, we have a data center in the Northwest of Nigeria. That is a region. Right? Now, within that northwestern part of Nigeria, there are different states within that region. All right? There are different states within that region. Now, those different states in the cloud computing space are referred to as availability zones. All right? For example, in the southwestern part of Nigeria, all right, which is a region, all right, they call it the southwestern region, right? Now, within that southwestern part of Nigeria, you have states like Oyo State, you have states like Lagos, you have states like Osun, Ondo, Ekiti. All right, you have all of those states. Now, all those states within the southwestern region of Nigeria are referred to as availability zone. Okay, so which means AWS is in the southwest region, but within that region, they now have data centers in, all right, one or two of those states. Okay. One or two of those states. Okay, so basically the reason for that is because, number one, that in the cloud computing space also you talk about what you talk about things like high availability. Okay, so that any time that I need to access my data is highly available. Now, what is high availability? Let's break high availability down. What is high availability? Now, let's look at it like this. Now, in Nigeria, we are dealing with a lot of things, right? There's a lot of issues, all right, particularly power. All right, we still do a lot with power, right? You cannot predict, there can be light today, there cannot be light tomorrow, and all of that. So everybody's running, a generating set, right? And some people have taken it a step further. They have a solar system within the organization. All right. Now, high availability in the cloud space, let's bring it down to the things that are happening in Nigeria. Let's use the Nigerian concept to explain what high availability is. All right, and why the cloud providers have decided to have at least 2 or 3 availability zones within a region. Now, if you run a business in Nigeria, for example, and you know that, all right, you can't bank on power. Okay, so the first thing you do is what? You get a generating set. All right, you buy one and then you power it up. Of course, you buy petrol and all of that. All right, because your business needs light to thrive and to survive. Okay, now as time goes on, all right, the generating set, of course, the wear and tear is getting old. All right, if you pull it once before, it answers you, but now you have to pull it maybe like 2 or 3 times. Or if it's the one that you have to use the key to start, okay, the battery is failing. There are a lot of issues with it now. It's not really responding as it used to be when you first bought it and all of that. And you know that if the gen should go out of service, right, it's going to impact your business, right? And your customers are not going to like that. So which means you're going to have disappoint, all right, quite a number of your customers. So the idea is that as a business person, you want to be highly available, all right? You want to be highly available. If you give your customers 1 day or 1 week to come to get their materials or their item, you want your 1 week to be 1 week. So which means you have to be highly available. So how do you become highly available? all right, as a business person. So what do? There are different options, right? The first option is maybe you get another generating set so that if this one messes up, you can quickly start up the other one. And then with that way, all right, you're not missing out on anything and you're able to deliver quality to your customers. Now, another option is with that same generating set that you're using, okay, you get a solar system or an inverter system. You get batteries, you talk to an electrician and says, oh, you can get maybe a 5 kV inverter, it will work for you. You can carry all the things you have in your office. I say, okay, I think that will work for me. All right. And they tell you, oh, once there is light, the inverter will be charging. Once they take off light, the inverter will take over and all of those kind of stuff. So you get an inverter set. So if the generator messes up, you switch to the inverter and then business continues. That is high availability. All right. That is what? High availability. So what you have just done as a business person is you are highly available. So if you tell your customers your item is ready in 1 week, your 1 week is 1 week, because now you have put a system in place that ensures that if one of the power system fails, there's another one that can take it off from there, and then you are not out of business in any way. And that is why, if you look at the telecom operators that we have, all right, that are available in Nigeria, and you talk about Glo, MTN, and the rest of them, all right, within that and within their, all right, where they have their mast, all right, their base stations, you will discover that they have generating sets and they also have solar system, right? What are they trying to do? They are simply trying to be highly available. That's what they're trying to do. Okay, so there's no cell site or there's no base station site you go to in Nigeria, all right, that you don't have a generator and then a solar system. All right, and then they've done it in such a way that they've synchronized the two together. So at night, the solar systems take over. All right, in the midday, generators is running, right, to make sure the system is working and everything is fine. So during the night, it is assumed that the solar system will have been charged, all right, properly, and then that takes over. So that saves them on diesel. Okay, so what are they trying to achieve? They are simply trying to achieve high availability. Okay, so in the cloud space also, within each of the region, right, in the US East region, AWS has about 6 availability zones. So that means they have 6 data centers in that region alone. All right, it's just like saying that in the Southwest region, AWS has, all right, a server in all of the Southwestern states. Okay, so which means if you're in the southwestern part, you can deploy your applications in Lagos, you can deploy your applications in Oyo and the rest of them. So high availability in that sense means that you now begin to deploy your application in 2 or more of those availability zones. All right, that is what high availability means. So that if something happens to one of the zones, because right, the cloud providers, they've given you a platform where you are transitioning from capital expenditure to operating expenses. But don't also forget there are things that your cloud providers also cannot control. They cannot control natural disaster, right? They cannot control, or they cannot even tell when a server is going to go down or when a server is going to be interrupted. I'm sure most of us here, we've had issues, all right, with Facebook going down. You cannot access your WhatsApp at one point or the other, right? All those things happen to us. And then after some minutes, all right, you can access those services back again. Now I'm looking for an image. I want to show us, all right, what cloud high availability is about. I've used the example of the generator and the business, but I just want to show us an image, all right, that explains this concept, okay, practically. So just stay with me for a few minutes. I want to show us a diagram, all right, a diagram that can help us to understand this things, all right, more in depth. Okay, I'm trying to look for the folder where I kept the whole thing. Just a minute, please. Where are you going? Okay, I think. Okay, yeah, found it. So let me show us this image to explain this availability in the cloud, all right, environment, so that we can get the idea and then tie it up with, all right, what we just said now. Now, if you look at this image right here, if you can see my screen, if you can see my screen, just say yes in the chat section so that I know everybody can see my screen. If you can see my screen, you can just put yes in the chat section. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. So now this is what high availability looks like in the cloud space. All right. In the cloud environment, this is what high availability simply looks like, right? Now, if you look at it here, we have a server that is deployed, but the server is deployed in two, all right, in two separate availability zones. So you have availability zone 2 here, which is the US East 1B, all right, and then you have the availability zone, right, 1 here, which is the US East 1A. So which means if something happens with the servers that are here, the servers that are here will simply take over. So the customers, all right, will not feel any kind of outage. They will not know that anything is happening. Okay, so that's why I use the generator to explain. So just assume that this is your generating set and this is your solar. So if your generator goes out, the solar is there to take up, all right, from where the generator stopped. So in that way, you are not losing out on any, all right, business whatsoever. Okay, so high availability is just saying that you deploy your resources in two different zones so that if something happens in one of the zones, the other zone is still there to serve as your backup. So that way, you are not losing anything. So that way, you are still a business. All right. Okay. So that is just simply what high availability is about. All right. So having said all of these things, all right, let's now dive into the S3 space and let us create our first bucket. But just hold on for a minute for me. I just need to take care of something quickly. All right, guys, thank you. I just needed to take care of something very quickly. Okay, so let's create our first bucket and let's see what S3 bucket is about. So now, if you don't have the icon on your own desktop like I do, all right, it's simple. You can click on the search button, the search bar right here and type in S3. Okay, type in S3. Okay, so if you type in S3, that is going to bring out the S3 for you. So if you click on it, it's still going to take you to this page that I'm on. All right. So let's create our first bucket. So the first thing you need to do is to click on create bucket. And then now I was trying to explain the issue of the global earlier. Now your S3 bucket is global. Now global in the sense that there are no two buckets within the Amazon S3 that has the same name across any of the regions. So which means you cannot find a bucket, all right, that is the same name, all right, in, for example, the US East, and then it's also the same name in the Asian Pacific. Okay, so every bucket on the cloud on AWS, every bucket is distinct. So which means there are no two buckets that bear the same name. All right, so we must note that. So when you are creating your S3 bucket is simply global. Now, global in the sense that your name is unique across. So whatever bucket we create now, there's nobody in the world using AWS that can use that same name. It's not possible. All right, and that's why your S3 bucket is what? Is global. So which means the bucket you create is your own. Nobody can claim that bucket. Nobody can create another bucket with that same name. Okay, so even if I have my own account, you have your own account, we still cannot use this. We still cannot use the same name because we have different accounts. All right, so buckets in S3 in AWS is unique across, all right, the different regions. All right, so let's create this. So we call this. So let's call this class. Let's just say free AWS class bucket. Okay, let's call it that. Now, the global aspect of S3 is the fact that the bucket name, all right, let's pay attention. The bucket name is unique across, all right, the different regions. All right, that's the global aspect of it. But when you are creating an S3 bucket, you still must create that bucket in a region. All right, that bucket must still be created in a region. Now, the global perspective is that the name should be unique across the different regions so that there are no two buckets bearing the same name across, all right, the AWS region. Okay, but that bucket must still be resident in a particular region. And so what AWS does with your S3 bucket, what they do for you basically is this. When you create a bucket, the bucket is in the region. Behind the scene, the data in that bucket is replicated across the different zones within that region that you have chosen. Okay, so on AWS part, they will try to keep a copy of your data, all right, in the different zones. Of course, it's not going to be visible to you, It's just for their own, all right, disaster recovery. So that if something happens to that region where you created the bucket, you wouldn't have to lose your data. All right. So they are responsible for making sure that, all right, your data, all right, comes back on. But you also have a responsibility to ensure that whatever data you put in that bucket is also replicated, all right, to different areas, all right, to different regions, so that if something happens to your primary region, right, your secondary region, you can still recover your data, all right, back from that secondary region. So we give our bucket a name. Now, there are a few rules when it comes to, right, creating an S3 bucket. So if you click on this place, it shows you, all right, you can read from there, from that page, a few rules when creating a bucket. So these are the rules that you must follow when you're creating an S3 bucket. All right, these are the rules that you must follow when you're creating an S3 bucket. All right, you must follow all of these rules. So rule number one, the names must be between three, all right, the length must be 3 minimum and then 63 of maximum characters. A bucket can consist only lowercase letters, numbers, dots, and hyphen. All right, so your bucket cannot be created using uppercase. That's what it means. Bucket name must begin and end with a letter or number. All right, so you have to begin it with a letter or with a number. So you can't begin it with a dot or with a character. And the bucket name must not contain 2 adjacent periods. All right, 2 adjacent periods. So you cannot have something like this, maybe let's say dot dot or something. You can have something like that when you're creating a bucket. All right. And then also you must also know that your bucket cannot also be an IP address. You must also know that. Then your bucket name must not start with this prefix, and your bucket must not also end with this suffix. Okay. So let me just put the link in the chat section so you can read up on that. All right, you can read up on that later when you have the time, just to get familiar with, all right, S3 bucket. And one of the things that I need to mention also is this. Now, when you are learning any technology, all right, when you are learning any technology, all right, documentation should be your friend. Okay, what do I mean by that? Now, every technology that is out there, they have a website and they have documentation for their services. Okay, so if you are learning about computers, whatever technology you are learning about, that particular technology has a site and they have documentation that details how you can go about using their services. Okay, so when you are trying out things on your own and it's not working, I recommend that you go to the documentation of that particular technology you're trying to learn and try as much as possible to understand what they are trying to say. So try to read up, all right, on their documentation. So it helps a lot, all right, because it's not possible for you to memorize, all right, every of the technology, how you can use it, how it works and all that. So at some point you get stuck. So what you can do is to go over their documentation and read up. Okay, no matter how good you are, no matter how savvy you are in technology, you cannot be as good as the documentation. So you have to consult the documentation because the services are updated regularly. So whatever it is that you know, if you're not careful, all right, if you go to the documentation, something may have changed. And then, so that's why I recommend to people, when you're learning any technology, make sure that you read the documentation as much as possible. All right, so that's that on that. So our bucket is free AWS class bucket. So let's hope somebody has not taken that name already. So we specify our region, yes, the EU region, that's my region. And all right, so we can leave all of this. Now, all these ones is Amazon's way of, right, blocking your buckets. Now, the idea behind this is any bucket you create on AWS, it is not accessible to the public by default. Now, initially, that used to be the case, but then there were some data leaks on, right, on AWS S3, which led to so many issues and all that. So what they now did was, if you're creating a bucket on Amazon S3, right, by default, your bucket is blocked. There's no public access. So if you now want to enable public access, you will have to do that, all right, on your own. And then whatever, if your document gets lost and all that, it will be, you're right, on your own head. You can't blame AWS, all right, for that. Okay, so by default, public access is blocked for all buckets by default, right? Bucket versioning, all right, that is just a system by which you can retain copies of your objects, right? Now, every data you put on S3 is referred to as an object, right? Every data is referred to as an object, right? So bucket versioning, the purpose of bucket versioning is to ensure that as you update your content, as you update your bucket, as you update your, right, for example, let's do this example, okay? You put, let's use Microsoft Word as an example, right? If you open Microsoft Word, for example, and you start typing a document, right, and then you save, let's say today you typed a page and you saved it, and then tomorrow you save that file, you close it, you leave it, and then tomorrow you go back to that file and then you open it up. Right now, I'm not sure if of course, for some of us who may be using Office 365, if you're familiar with Office 365, Office 365 gives you something that is called version history, right? And what that does for you is to ensure that as you update a particular document, it gives you the version history, all right? It gives you what? The version history. So now the purpose of the version history is that if you want to revert back to a previous date, all right, on that document, you can easily revert back to that previous date, okay? That is what versioning does for you. So versioning on S3 is also the same thing, okay? We're going to see that in action shortly, okay? But let's just understand that versioning is just a way to, all right, update your document. And then if you want to revert back to previous versions of that document, it is easy for you to revert back to it. So let's leave this as is. Let's leave that. Encryption, yes, encryption is just basically password, just like the phone that you use. All right, your phone has a password, or for some people, you use a PIN on your mobile phone. So anybody that wants to access your mobile phone must know your PIN before they can access it. Okay, so encryption is also similar. It's just a way to protect the data or the object you have inside of your bucket, all right, to ensure that the object does not go into the wrong hands. But for now, we're going to disable it because encryption is actually something that is not cheap, it's not free on AWS, so we need to disable that. And then all these ones, we can leave them. So let's create our first bucket. And let's begin to see the different. All right, so luckily for us, nobody has used that bucket. All right, nobody has used that name, so the name is unique only to us. Now, if you look at this bucket that we just created, it says bucket and object not public. So the question is, how do I start putting data inside of this my bucket? So if I click on this bucket name, all right, the bucket name is empty. Okay, now let's look at the concept of versioning first. All right, and let's see how versioning works. So if I click on upload, let's say I want to put something inside of that bucket. I want to add a file. All right, I can click on add files. And then from here, let's say, let me go to pictures. Let me see if I have something. Okay, so let's say we've added this coffee file right here. All right, the coffee file has been added. Okay, and then I click on upload. All right, so the coffee file has been uploaded. Okay, now the coffee file was uploaded by this date, all right, which is the UTC +1. So this is, all right, doing, all right, the London time zone. Okay, so UTC +1, 2023, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now if I click on this coffee file, of course, I can't view it. It's not publicly accessible, right? Don't forget, our bucket is not what? Is not public. Okay, so whatever it is that you put inside of that bucket is not something people can view externally. Okay, but we're going to get to that on how we can make it public and everybody can access it. We're going to get into that. All right, now let's say I delete this accidentally. All right, maybe I was doing something I didn't know, and then somehow I just deleted the whole thing. Now it tells me permanently delete object. So permanently delete means if you delete it, you are not able to recover it again. All right, that is what it means. So if you delete, it's not something that you can recover again. So it's asking you, are you sure you want to permanently delete object? It says to confirm deletion, type permanently delete. All right, so let me copy that and say yes. I'm in my right senses. I want to delete this object. Now, the object is no longer there. It's no longer accessible. I can't find it. I can't see it. All right, so it's gone. Now, let's bring in versioning into the picture and let's see the difference between the two. Now, stay with me. Pay attention to this dashboard that we have, and then I want you to observe something. Something is going to change. Something is going to pop up here when we enable versioning. All right, so stay with me and let us see what happens. So let's go to properties. All right, and let's go to edit bucket versioning and let us enable versioning. All right, and let us see changes. All right, now let's go back to objects and let's see something. Now, something is here that was not here before. All right, something is here that we didn't see before, and that is what? That is the show versions. It wasn't there before, all right, before we enabled, all right, version. It wasn't there, but now we have that available. All right, now let's upload that document again and let's see how this versioning works. So add files. Let's add our coffee back again. Okay, and then upload. All right, uploaded. So let's close this. Now, the coffee file is uploaded. Now, if I click on show versions, now there's something we didn't see before, which is the version ID. Okay, so this document has been automatically versioned. All right, it's been automatically versioned. Okay, so which means if I check the version, it shows me the version ID, right? If I untoggle this, it shows me just this. I didn't see the version ID. Now let's try what we tried earlier. All right, let's say we just want to delete it, and then maybe we didn't know that it was important, and then we want to delete. So if you click on delete, now let's see the difference. Now, what is the difference between this and what we did earlier, right? What we have now is just saying delete. It didn't say permanently delete. Now, permanently delete because versioning was not undone, but now versioning has been turned on, so it's asking us to just delete. So which means it's not going to permanently delete it. And so if we accidentally delete this object, that means there's a way to actually recover back the objects that we have deleted because versioning is now turned on. All right. And then if you read what you have here, it says, if you need to undo the delete action, you can delete the deleting marker. We're going to see that shortly. So let's type in delete. And let's just say, oh, okay, yeah, I want to delete it. Okay, and then let's close this. All right. Now, practically, my data is not there. It's gone, just like before. But then there's a catch. And the catch is this. If you check this guy, somehow it looks like your data is still available because it was deleted and not permanently deleted. Okay, so that's the purpose of using versions. Now, in a real world environment, in an office environment where you're going to be working with all of these things, every bucket you create must have, all right, versioning turned on. Okay, every bucket you create must have versioning turned on, because people can accidentally delete things that are critical to the organization. All right, so you don't want them to permanently delete it. You want them to, at least even if they delete, there should be a way to recover it back so that you don't lose critical data. All right, so now if I want to recover back this, because if I uncheck this, I really don't see anything. It is hidden from my eye. So if I want to recover back my object, all I need to do is to, check this version guy. Now the delete marker, we had something about it earlier. So if I want to delete it, all I need to do is to delete the delete marker. So I will check that and then click on delete. All right. And then now I can see my permanently delete. That is showing up again for me now. But now let's see what happens with that option. So if I do permanently delete, now remember what I'm deleting is what? I'm deleting the delete marker, not the original document, right? So delete object, that's gone. So close. And then if I uncheck this back, all right, my file is simply back. Okay, now that is the advantage of using versioning. All right, that's the purpose of using versioning, because people can accidentally delete things and you don't want that to happen. All right, so that's the purpose of using, all right, that option. Now, another thing also is this. Okay, thank you so much. Another thing also is this. Now we talked about the fact that our bucket, right? This bucket here is saying the access type is that the bucket is not public. So whatever content that we have here is something that is just visible to us alone. All right, it's just visible to us alone. So, for example, this coffee. Now, let's say maybe this coffee picture that I have here is something that I want to share, maybe with my wife or with my children or with my family members or with my friends. Or maybe I took the picture on a vacation spot. Maybe I went to a place and I enjoyed myself and I took some pictures and I want to, and all right, they are not with me, they are far away. And I'm just looking for a platform to share the pictures with them. All right. Now, they don't have access to this platform. So there has to be a way that I can make these pictures public. All right. Now, if you look at it, the reason why everybody can download the INEC results on the IRF portal is because they actually made those results public through their website. So which means everybody can go to their website and access those results. You can download those images. Because if you notice, the INEC result was actually captured with their Beavers device. And then they uploaded those images on their IRF portal. So anybody can go there to download those images, and check them. So what they have simply done is to ensure that the content of that bucket, everybody can access it, and then you can make use of that result. So let's see how INEC also did it, how they enabled that for people to access all of those results. Now, there are two ways to make your bucket public. There are two ways. Now, let's look at the first one, the easier way. Now, there's a feature on AWS S3 that is called pre-signed URL. Pre-signed what? URL. Now, what does the pre-signed URL do? The purpose of the pre-signed URL is such that you want to maintain the privacy of your bucket. All right. At the same time, you want to make it public. So how do you do that? How does that work? All right. You want to maintain the privacy of the bucket, while at the same time, you want to expose the content of that bucket. Now, the pre-signed URL simply gives you that option in the sense that your bucket is private, but then you can enable pre-signed URL in such that you can give people time, hours, minutes by which they can access the content of that bucket. Now, after that number of hours are expired, they no longer have access to the content anymore. So let's see how that works. So if you click on this, this picture, you go to actions from here, and then you will find share with what? With a pre-signed URL right here. So if I click on this, it gives me all of these options. Now it says anyone can access the object with a pre-signed URL until it expires, even if the bucket and object are private. Okay, like I said, you want to keep your bucket private. At the same time, you want to share the content of that bucket with people. All right, you want to share the content with people. But then the pre-signed URL gives you that privilege, it gives you that leverage. So now it says the time interval until the pre-signed URL expires. So if I specify 2 minutes here, it means that anybody that I share the URL with, they will only be able to access this image just within 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, that link expires and they are not able to access the content of that bucket again. All right. So if I say hours, they can also access within 2 hours. And then if you look at it, it says the old number is between 1 and 12 hours. So which means you can share the content of your bucket with people with 12 hours maximum. All right. And if it is minutes, it can not be more than 720 minutes, which I think is still equivalent to the 12 hours. So let's say we want to share the content of this bucket for 2 minutes so that every one of us on this call can access the content for just 2 minutes. All right. So if I click on create pre-signed URL, so if I copy this URL right here and I open it here and I paste it here and I open it, somehow my bucket is visible. All right. Now let me send you the URL. You can also access it from your end. All right, that's the URL. If you open it up, you will be able to access it from your end. So just click on the URL and you'll be able to access it. Now, here is the catch, right? Remember, what we did was to limit it to what? To 2 minutes. So let me keep refreshing. So let's check our time and let's just wait for 2 minutes and let's see what happens with this image, right? Let's see what happens with this image. Of course, you can download it. If you right click on it, you can see the options here. You can save the image, you can copy the image, but everything is just within the 2 minutes, right? So let's refresh. After the 2 minutes, it's going to expire. Now, another thing that I want you to pay attention to is this. It says there's this long, all right, security token and blah, blah, blah that is attached to that guy, right? That's a long one. So that's if I'm still audible, please just tell me in the chat section. Hello, please. If I'm still audible, just say yes in the chat section, please. I think I lost my connection. Yeah. If I'm still audible, please let me know. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. My connection just went off somehow. All right, it's back now. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, now I think the 2 hours has elapsed. If you look at it here, it says access denied because the 2 hours has expired. So if you click on that link that I sent to you now, you should also have this same result that I have on my link, simply because the link has expired. All right. So that is how the pre-signed URL works. Okay. And that is one way to make your content public. So now let's go the other way, which is kind of, all right. That one is going to take us a little while, but just stay with me and follow me. All right. So the link has expired. So it's no longer accessible. People can no longer use it again. All right. So let's look at the other way, and then let's see how we can make this accessible the other way around, right? Okay, so pre-signed URL expired. Now let's look at the other way. Now, another way by which you can do this is this. You can go to permissions, for example. All right. Now it tells you that buckets and objects are not public, right? Remember, the way we shared the access to our bucket initially was what? Through, all right, just a minute, through the, all right, pre-signed URL. So let's assume that I want to make this bucket public. I don't want to restrict it using time and stuff like that. I want people to be able to have access for as long as they want and all of that. All right. So I don't want to restrict it by time. All right. Because I don't want anybody calling me to say, oh, I can't access your piece and all of that. So let's just open it up. All right. You can imagine, INEC using that option. And then every now and then people are calling, oh, the agents are calling INEC. The link has expired though. We need another link. Oh, it's going to be a lot of headache, right? Which is not reasonable, right? So let's look at the other way by which you can make it, you can make the bucket or the object, all right, public permanently without using that pre-signed URL. So let's pay attention to these words here. Bucket and object are not public. Now, the first thing you want to do, initially what AWS did was this, all right, was that if you click on edit here and you uncheck this and you save changes, and then it will ask you to confirm. So you confirm it that you're in your right senses, you want to go ahead, all right? So you confirm. Okay, now the confirmation has been done, right? It says everything is off. But if you pay attention to what you have here, it's still saying that the bucket and the object are not public. Okay, that's what you still have. So even if you go back to buckets, that's what you still have, bucket and object not public. So it means the URL is still not, if I click on this now, and all right, and I click on the object URL. Now this object URL, if I click on it and I paste it here, all right, and I click on enter, I still get the same error, right? Access denied. I still cannot access it. So what do I need to do? So let's see what we can do. Okay, so let's see what can be done. Hello? Okay. Right. Okay. Pressing something. Okay. All right. So let's go back to our bucket and let's see what we can do. So we go to permissions again. Okay, now we've removed this, all right, those options right here. Now we are left with one choice now, and that is what you call bucket policy. Now, initially, this was the only thing we needed to do, all right, before, but AWS has removed that option for us. So that is no longer the only thing you need to do now. There are other things you also need to consider. So the next thing you want to do now is to click on edit, right? You want to input some bucket policy. Now we're going to use what you call a policy generator. AWS gives us that privilege. So if you click on policy generator, you can go there and click on it. Now, what is the purpose of this policy generator? Now, we want to define a policy. Now, when somebody talks about a policy document, right? When you hear things like, oh, the government just released the policy document, all right? The government just released, for example, the tax, all right, policy document they released, I think it was the last year that Nigeria released that policy about, taxing and all those kind of things. Now, what they are basically saying is that from henceforth, this is the document that is going to guide, all right, how you pay your taxes for individuals, SMEs, and all right, medium to large enterprises, right? So what we also want to do is to create a policy. And basically what that policy is going to do is that we want to allow, all right, access to, we want to allow our people, all right, from the public to be able to access the content now, all right? Remember, what we are allowing access to is the content of our bucket. Okay, so we want to define a policy that ensures that people, all right, that have our link, all right, this link are able to access the content of our bucket. So that's the policy that we are trying to define. So let's go here. So the policy type is something that applies to S3 bucket, all right? So we choose S3. So what is the effect? Of course, we want to allow. A principal is, all right, principal can be who, it can be what. All right, basically, the principal there basically means who or what can access this service, all right? Who or what. So which means it can be an IAM user like we created in the last class, or it can be another AWS service, all right? Like it can be another AWS service, right? It can be maybe EC2 or any other AWS service. So here, we are not going to specify any who or any what, we're just going to put asterisk. Asterisk means anybody. So whether it's an IAM user, whether it's an AWS EC2 instance, whatever it is, anybody should be able to access, all right, the content of our bucket. So actions, what are the actions? So action is basically means, all right, so these people or this service that we're allowing access to, which is the principal, what is this principal able to do? All right, now you don't want your principal to have access to just do anything on your bucket. Now, remember in the last class, we talked about the principle of least privilege. If you remember, we talked about that, the principle of least, so which means you only give permissions to people, all right, based on what you want them to do on your system per time, all right? So if the person is to collect files, the only permission they have is to collect files. If the person is to print file, the only permission they have is to print files, all right? Somebody that should not be in a board meeting would not be there, would not be invited in the first instance, all right? Because that person is not a board member. Okay, so the idea is this. Now, the principal is asterisk, which means anybody or anything can access this bucket, but then we are limiting what they can also do, all right, using the actions. So what are the actions that they can do? Now, remember what we said is we want to allow people to access the content of our bucket, right? We want people to access the content of our bucket. Now, accessing the content of our bucket means we want them to view, all right, whatever it is that we have inside of our bucket, all right? View. I use the word view, okay? Because basically, if I send you this link, you should be able to view this coffee image, right? So that is what we want to allow. Just view access, okay? If you remember in the last class when we were talking about the IAM, I said, for example, the person at the gate is only supposed to be at the gate, all right? That's the access and that's the privilege he has. So in this case as well, we are also allowing view access. So just view the content of our bucket and nothing more. So how do we go about that? If you scroll down, there's what you call get object right here. Now this get object is basically an action that says this principal, whoever it is, whatever it is, can view the content of this bucket and nothing more. Okay, so that's the action we want the principal to perform. Now, Amazon resource name, what is that? Amazon resource name is just an identity, all right? The identity of your bucket. How do we get that? Very simple. We go back here. This is your bucket ARN, so it's just the identity of your bucket. So if you click here, you can click on it, and then that copies the ARN for you. And then you go back here, and then you paste that right there. Now, let's take a look at this thing again. We want people to view the content of our bucket, right? So which means the objective is the object, not the bucket, all right? The objective is what? Is the content of the bucket and not the bucket itself. So the access that we are providing these people with is to allow them to view what is inside of our bucket, not necessarily that they can do anything with the bucket itself. All right. So what we are allowing them access to is the content and not the container. All right. So if that is clear. So the bucket, yes, there's something inside of that bucket. All right. That is what we want people to access, not the container. All right. Now look at this example. If somebody comes to your place and then you give the person, all right, maybe food, all right, in a particular container, and the container is precious to you, and you tell the person, when you're done, please return the container to me. All right. Now, the purpose of serving that person that container is to give that person the food. All right. So what you're giving the person access to is the food inside that container, not the container itself. All right. So the person has access to the food, but the person does not, all right, own that container. Okay. So that's what we are also trying to do. So the people that want to access our bucket, they are only allowed to view what is inside, all right, of that container. They are not allowed to do anything with the container itself. Okay. So if I just paste this ARN right here like this permission or this policy that I'm trying to do will not work, because I am simply specifying the bucket. I'm not specifying a part that says that what I want people to access is actually the content of this bucket and not the bucket. Because remember, the action is what? Is get object, not get bucket. If you get that. The actions here, the action we specified here is what? Is get object and not get bucket. Okay? So which means if you don't specify a part to the content in your bucket, this policy is simply not going to work, because the action is get object and not bucket. Okay, so how do we specify that? So it tells you that ARN here should follow the following format. So the ARN, the bucket name / all right, the name of the object that you want your people to be able to access. Okay, so how do we do that? So we can simply do / all right. What's the name of the content? The name of the content is simply coffee.jpg. So we can put coffee.jpg right there. All right. So / coffee.jpg. All right. That's what we want people to be able to access. All right. So you click on add statement, and then you generate your policy. All you need to do now is to copy this policy, go back to your bucket policy, and then paste the policy right there, and then save your changes. All right, the changes has been saved. Okay, so if you go back to your object, let us refresh it now, and let's see if we are still able to access our object. So the policy has been applied. So let's see what happens with the policy that we have applied. All right, the page is refreshing. It's taking a little while. Okay, now, can you see this? Publicly what? Accessible. All right, publicly what? This was not there before, but we've applied a policy now, and it tells us that it's publicly accessible. All right, so if I click here now and I refresh this guy, and then I have, now pay attention. The present URL that we did earlier had some kind of long string behind it, but this does not have that, because we have applied a policy. So anytime, if I leave this to be, that means you can access it anytime and any day. All right, so if I send it to you now and you access it, it is simply available. All right, it is simply available. So if you click on this now, you can also access the coffee that I also have access to in this place. So that's how the two ways to, all right, enable access to your bucket. All right, so we've talked about pre-signed URL, which is the first option. And then we've talked about the second option, which is applying a policy to your bucket. And then, all right, you're able to access. Now, let's say one more thing before we entertain question, and then that'll be a wrap on S3. Now, pay attention to something. The policy we applied is only applicable to this coffee.jpg. So the question is this: if I upload another document, let's say maybe a PNG file, will I be able to access it despite the fact that my bucket is now public? Let's give it a try. So let's go back and let's do an upload. Let's try another document entirely. So hard files. All right, and then let's see. Okay, let's even try this one. All right, now, okay, this is a PNG, but of course the name is different, right? Now let me add another one. PNG file. I'm looking for a JPEG file. Can I find one? Oops. I'm looking for a JPEG. Okay, so this is JPG. That's the logo. All right, so upload it. Okay. Now, all of these files that are here, now this one is JPEG, this one is also JPEG. So if I click on this run.jpg, for example, and I click on the object URL and I put it here, let's see what happens with that. Okay, can you see that? Access denied. But somebody may want to ask, but we've enabled, and if I refresh this other guy, the file is still there, nothing has changed, it's still accessible. So somebody may want to ask, what's the problem? Why is it not accessible? Well, it's not going to be accessible because if you look at the policy that you have, the policy simply allows just this single file. All right, it's just a single file that is allowed. So how do you allow all the other files? For example, maybe I want to allow a JPEG file. So anything that is JPEG in my bucket, I want it to be public. So what do? Very simple. All you need to do is to go to your bucket. All right. Sorry. Okay, just click on the bucket here. Okay, and then go back to permissions. And then you can edit, write your policy again. So click on edit. All right. And then right here, you can specify this. So here I can delete off the coffee and I can replace that with an asterisk. All right. So what I'm simply saying is that anything, whatever the name is, all right, as long as it ends with a JPEG, is permitted, right? That's what that statement means. So I don't care about the name of the file. What I'm particular about is the extension. So any file whatsoever, as far as it ends with .jpg, please allow it to be public. So if I save changes, and then if I refresh this guy, it's still going to be accessible. And then if I refresh this guy now, all right, the logo is now accessible. Okay. Now, one more thing before we go. All right, before we ask questions, let's go back. Now we have another file right there. So we have this banner here. So if I click on this banner, right, remember that one is PNG. So if I click on the object URL and I, all right, click on it and I want to open it up, that is simply not going to open because the policy says the extension must end with what? Must end with .jpg. And this right here is what? Is PNG. So how do we correct that? So one thing you can do is that you can go back to your bucket, all right, go to permissions, and then, all right, you can edit the policy again. And this time around, you can say, you know what? I am tired of this PNG, JPEG, blah, 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 blue, you know. All right. So, and then you simply just say, you know what? Asterisk, right? So I don't care about the name of the file. I don't care about the extension. Any file, any object at all in my bucket, please allow it to scale through. So let's see if that changes and let's see what happens. So here, okay, if I refresh that, voila, all the bala blue and bulu blah is done. So you can access your bucket, you can access the content, everything is accessible, everything is working fine. All right. And that is how you make your object public and you use your S3 as well. All right. In the next class on Monday, I'm just going to I'm going to show us one more thing about S3, and that is on what you call life cycle rules. All right. I'm going to touch on that, and then replication rules, how you can use this to what it means. All right. Why they are important, and how you can, understand this life cycle, what it is, and you need to understand it also if you are going to work in an environment that uses all of this. And replication rule also is something you must understand. Replication rule is just something that talks about the high availability that we talked about the other time. All right, so that's what we have for us today. Now it's time for questions and contributions. Okay, let me stop the recording so that